No, it's okay. Slide. Okay, so I'm sorry. Okay, so good morning, everybody. I hope everybody settled down. And so, yeah, hearty welcome. And so, finally, the time for our yearly pilgrimage has arrived. So, what's our religion? Audience? Yes, exactly. MPC, right? What's our faith? Yes, that the MPC can change the world, right? So, with immense pleasure, allow me to welcome all of you to the 11th edition of the Theory and Practice of Multi-Party Computation workshop here at IISc. Indeed, a hearty welcome. So a little bit of trivia about TPMPC. You might already know TPMPC had started back in 2013 at Aarhus, Denmark, and since then it is happening at a few places within Europe. And this is the first time it has traveled outside the continent, and I'm very happy to bring it here at IISc. And here's the steering committee, which basically does the decision making of TPMPC on various affairs. And now, very little about the place, about the institute you are at. So you are at Indian Institute of Science, which is one of the oldest and the most reputed institution in India. It is a 115 years old pre-independence era establishment which was founded from the generous support of J.N. Tata. It is one of the few institutes within India that is awarded the tag of Institute of Eminence. And since its inception, this institute has strived to provide the best establishment for research, fulfilling the initial goal of the founder of putting India at the forefront of research. So this is a real picture from the earlier days, and you don't see the city of Bangalore behind, right? And this is, of course, of the current era, and this is a bird's eye view of the institute. And as you can see, we pump in a lot of oxygen in the ecosystem. And these are various snapshots of our campus. When you get time during the break after the day is over, feel free to roam around in the campus. And our department, which is the Department of Computer Science and Automation, has started much later in 1969. And since then, it has consistently contributed to the research in the prominent areas of computer science. Now back to TPMPC. So this year, the workshop features 10 invited speeches. And you can see the spread. We always go for diversity. Then we have 21 invited talks spreading from 8 different countries. And we have around 170 registrations. And you can see the divide that is only for foreign participants. And this includes the Indian population as well. So it's a big number. Apart from the invited and contributed talks, we do have 2 very relevant and interesting panels. You can see the titles over there: Trials, Tribulations, and Trumps, so Stories of Success and Failure in Cryptography. And the other one is Breaking Barriers, Diversity, Inclusion, and the Future of Cryptography. And you can see the respective panelists over here. I'm sure you are excited to hear from these people, the stalwarts, and also the young generations, young researchers. Of course, we do have the usual rump session. And here we will be having entertaining presentations on recent results, breaking news, and other topics of interest. Please submit your presentation by today because it's tomorrow. So by the end of the day, you should submit your upcoming results and funny ideas, whatever you have. And of course, a bunch of thanks to our sponsors. We have a lot of them, and as a result, we have our registration fee completely free, and we could support everybody who have requested for support. Okay? And here are the volunteers. I mean, whenever you see them and you have any problem, right, just reach out to them. Okay? We'll solve your problem. If you don't want to reach in person, then we also have set up a TPMPC helpline. It can be reached via WhatsApp, Telegram, or Signal, whichever you use. For any emergency or any other reason, please feel free to contact that helpline number. We have also arranged e-rickshaws, which are battery operated between this time, between the nodal points. So Hoysala House is where most of the students are located. So from there to this auditorium, as well as the main gate to this auditorium, we have arranged these things. And lastly, you see the credentials. Actually, you can take a picture of this slide for your ready use. Of course, Auditorium is there, so everybody who has access to that, you can use it. Food. So foods and drinks are not allowed within the auditorium. Of course, you can carry water. That's absolutely fine. And in the breaks, coffee, tea, or lunch, everything will be served right here. But carry your badge, because no badge, no food. Okay, so don't lose it. And I guess that's it. With that, we are all set to start formally TPMPC 2025. So once again, welcome to all of you, and let's begin.
Test 1, 2.
Thank you. Welcome to the first session of this TPMPC. And I have the pleasure to introduce Christian Weitener. So Christian Weitener is a lecturer in the Department of Information Security and Director of Cryptographic Group at Royal Holloway University of London. Before, he was a doctoral and a postdoctoral research in Thomas Schneider and Crypto Group at DTU Darmstadt. Christian research mainly focuses on privacy-preserving machine learning and specialized MPC protocol, such as private set operation. Since March 2024, he is a member of the British Standard Institution, contributing a ISO standard on cryptography and security mechanism. So Christian will give a talk entitled Standardization of MPC, the journey so far and the road ahead.
All right. Good morning. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and also thank you to the organizers for inviting me to give this presentation. So I'm only be able to stand here in front of you and talk to you about standardization of MPC due to Chris Mitchell, who is the most senior member of our crypto group and who has been engaged in the standardization of cryptography already for like 3 decades. So around 2 years ago, Chris started asking me suddenly a lot of questions about MPC, what I think about particular protocols, and to review drafts that have been circulated within ISO committees to provide some comments. And after some time, this email exchange got a bit complicated or like unnecessary, so Chris suggested that I myself apply to join the British Standards Institution and then directly contribute to ISO standards, in particular ones that are currently being developed related to MPC. So with this in mind, what's the agenda for this presentation? First of all, I want to motivate and talk to you why having standards for MPC is important. Then I will provide an overview of which standards have already been published on MPC and which are essentially currently under development. With my experience in engaging in the ISO committee, I also want to provide some insights into how are standards actually being developed. And finally, if this presentation is somewhat successful, I hope that I will encourage a lot more of you to join these standardization activities and potentially even launch a new community effort to drive MPC standardization forward. So coming to the motivation, there are many reasons why having standards is important, but I restricted myself to 4 reasons on this slide. So first one is interoperability. It would be kind of a shame if you have an MPC protocol implemented and you use that in a collaborative data analysis setting, and then suddenly none of your implementations can talk to each other. So for that reason, it's quite nice to have a standard that defines interfaces and defines how various implementations of the same protocol are able to talk to each other. Then we have security and trust. So when there is an international standard relating to MPC, then you can have confidence that a fairly large number of international experts have reviewed these documents and found they are correct. So when you implement and rely on this implementation, you can have some kind of confidence boost. Talking about compliance, in many jurisdictions, it's actually required to rely on specific cybersecurity standards. And if your implementation follows an international standard relating, for example, to an MPC protocol, then you can fairly easily demonstrate that compliance. And last but not least, efficiency and cost reduction. So obviously it takes some time to develop these documents and verify that they are correct. And instead of each institution having to do that work by themselves, they can just go to the ISO portal, download a standard, and then start implementing that, and thereby saving all the costs that would have undergone in reviewing like scientific papers and then translating that into something that can be implemented. At this point, I also want to have a throwback to TPMPC 2022, where Yehuda Lindell gave an excellent invited talk about people trying to implement MPC papers, and he listed a lot of challenges why this can often go wrong. And in particular, challenge 2 is that protocols are sometimes underspecified and omit some obvious checks that should be contained in implementation. And therefore, again, it's quite nice to have a standard that actually does this translation work from a scientific paper into some implementation guidelines, and then therefore, of course, includes the full specification and all of these kind of obvious checks. Now you might think, okay, I'm an academic, I'm super busy, why should I care about MPC standardization when I could write a paper instead? First of all, I personally would say it's like the morally right thing, that if there are people in the world who actually want to implement your work, that you provide them a bit of guidance, how to translate that into an implementation. And I think having a standard document is a quite good way of doing that. Then you or your students might be involved in a startup or a university spin-out, and for those kind of activities, it's quite a kind of boost if they can advertise that they are following an international standard when they're using MPC as their core technology, and therefore benefit from all this kind of additional trust assumptions that come with that. And finally, the 2 points on the bottom might be a bit UK specific, but in the UK there are a bunch of frameworks like the Research Excellence Framework and the Knowledge Exchange Framework that essentially benchmark institutions, partly also how much they can create real-world impact. And if you can evidence that you are either active in standardization activities, or your work has been standardized, or your work is at least referenced in standard documents, then this is a fairly easy way to demonstrate this real-world impact. I should also note that there is a regulatory push for cybersecurity standards. In particular, in the EU, we have something called the EU Cyber Resilience Act, which essentially recognizes that a lot of products that are developed nowadays contain so-called digital elements. And in order to get all these digital elements somewhat in check, this Cybersecurity Resilience Act kind of wants to develop more cybersecurity standards that these digital elements then are supposed to implement, and therefore creating that resilience. Now, when it comes to standardization bodies, there is actually a whole lot of them. This is just a small selection. So you might know things like the Internet Engineering Task Force, who maintains standards such as the IP protocol. Then we have W3C, which maintains web-related standards like HTML. We will talk in depth about ISO and IEC later on. And you might have noticed that I also included NIST as an international standardization body. Strictly speaking, that's like a US entity developing standards for use in US government, but it's certainly fair to say that NIST has also international reach. Okay, so what is the current standard, what is the current status in MPC standardization? So I was able to find the following documents. The first one is a document by ITU, which gives technical guidelines for MPC. So this is a fairly lightweight document. It starts off by defining the roles and their relationships in MPC systems. So nothing surprising to see here. We have some input party, we have some compute nodes, and then somebody obtains the result. But in addition, they also think about what's actually going on in terms of coordination and how to configure all these different entities in an MPC system. Additionally, they provide a kind of software stack, how to implement the MPC system in practice. So what we usually think about is the MPC protocol and the MPC functions, and then potentially building some applications. But they also here consider the underlying like storage system and all these coordination functions that are necessary for things to work in terms of resource management, task management, and user management. They also provide a bunch of recommended additional protections when you want to implement an MPC system. First of all, authentication. How to check the users that have access to an MPC system. Of course, there should be some identification going on, and they give some pointers to current best practices, for example, to use multi-factor authentication associated with the system. Then, of course, also access control is kind of required. And in terms of data security, we often in papers assume there exist perfectly secure channels between parties, but of course these perfectly secure channels also need to be implemented. And the point I find quite interesting is the support for data destruction and cleanup methods. So ideally, after an execution of an MPC protocol, the remainders of that protocol shouldn't be hanging around in main memory for an extended period of time. So in your implementation, you should also properly clean up there. Fairly similar to this ITU document is an IEEE document called Recommended Practice for MPC. So large parts of that are virtually identical, but they also distinguish between the different modes of deployment that you can have for MPC. So server-side MPC is essentially like outsourced MPC. Peer-to-peer MPC is like the more classical setup where the input parties are also the compute parties, and then we have server-aided MPC where you assume that you have like a trusted dealer providing you beaver triples and so on. They also provide a bunch of recommended additional security protections for MPC system. We have already seen authentication, authorization, but they also talk about auditing, for which logging is important. For example, if in your MPC protocol there's an abort, then you obviously should log that event. And other protection methods that they suggest is, for example, a combination with trusted computing approaches, and also code signing to make sure that the code that you want to run in your MPC system, well, the one that is run is actually the one that you want to run. They also provide a fairly extensive reference architecture in their document, but for copyright reasons I shouldn't put it here in the slides, so that is just a very simplified version of that. Again, distinguishing between data services and compute nodes, and on top we have again task coordination with things like resource management and task scheduling. Moving on to IETF. So IETF currently focuses on a distributed aggregation protocol, DAP in short, for privacy preserving measurement, and that mainly builds on this PRIO line of work introduced by Corrigan Gibbs and Bonnet in 2017, and which was also relied upon by Apple and Google for implementing their exposure notification. So in general, that's a fairly simple approach where each client just creates secret shares of their data that should be aggregated, which in the simplest case could be a single bit. That is then shared to two non-colluding servers, and ultimately some party can reconstruct the aggregated results. And there's actually a system that builds upon this IETF standard, and that is the DivvyUp system developed by the Internet Security Research Group. And that in turn is used by a number of fairly prominent providers, maybe most prominently Mozilla, who uses that in their Firefox browser for providing essentially some privacy-preserving way of measuring the efficiency of online advertising. On the IETF website, you will also find a bunch of extensions relating to this DAP protocol. And quite interestingly, just 1 or 2 weeks ago, I noticed this document popping up there, which probably is the first kind of standard for PSI, in this time based on essentially Diffie-Hellman key exchange. But it should be noted that this is just an internet draft, so essentially anybody can go to the IETF website and upload a proposal in terms of in this kind of RFC style text document, and then this will appear online. But it should be noted that this is not yet considered like something that the IETF actively kind of advertises or recommends. So if you want to contribute, for example, then you can go on GitHub and so on and provide comments on this proposal. So this were all the kind of documents published by like established international standardization organizations. But what's about scientific literature? So has there been some academic thinking about MPC standardization? And essentially the only paper I was able to find is this one, published at SSR 2024, I think in December, which is a smaller conference or workshop thinking specifically about standardization of security mechanisms. So what the authors of this paper propose is to have like this 4 or 5 level approach. So on the bottom, of course, the MPC protocols, either like generic or like specialized ones. Then again, this configuration system, so to do all the coordination here. Interestingly, they propose also to have an MPC middleware, which then provides a bunch of functions to higher level applications that are commonly used. For example, data aggregation or some information retrieval. And maybe a bit controversial is this proposal to have also standards for MPC devices. So I can see where this makes sense. Clearly, when you have this kind of trusted third-party server that provides some inputs for your MPC protocols, I think it makes sense to specifically think about that. But I'm not too sure about having standards for like different, I don't know, MPC devices, depending on whether they execute like different types of secret sharing and so on. All right, so these were like all the works I found so far, apart from ISO, because I want to have like a bit more in-depth discussion about ISO due to my recent experiences in participating in these activities. So first of all, what is ISO? So ISO is an independent, non-governmental organization made up of members from the national standard bodies of 173 countries. And the particular working group dealing with the standardization of cryptography and MPC in particular is ISO IISc JTC1 SC27 Working Group 2. And there is some logic behind this. So first of all, ISO and IISc decided to team up on certain topics to not duplicate standardization efforts. So there's this joint technical committee for information technology. Within that, there is the subcommittee for information security, cybersecurity, and privacy protection. And within that, there is a specific working group for cryptography and security mechanisms. And as a general rule of thumb, you should always keep in mind there's essentially an ISO standard and an ISO working group for everything. So one of the most interesting examples I could find was this a subcommittee responsible for T, and then publishing standards relating to how to properly prepare that. If at the end of this talk you think this sounds all great and I want to participate, so how would you do that? First of all, you need to essentially find out which national standards body is applicable to you. So this is not only by like essentially passport, but can also be by location. So for example, I'm joined the ISO working group through the British Standards Institute and not the German Dean Institute. Then when you follow the links listed on this website, you will essentially get to an application form where you can just upload your CV essentially and a short statement why you want to participate. This will then get evaluated, and very likely, I mean, they're grateful for everybody who volunteers. They will accept you, and then you can participate in their activities. I should mention there's also funding available for that. So obviously, participating in these activities takes time, and there are international meetings to which you ideally travel to. And if this is not covered by other funding activities or other grants that you already have, there are dedicated funding opportunities for participating in standardization activities. These are EU-specific and relating to this CRA initiative. And there you can essentially put a short proposal saying for how much time and how much travel money you want to apply. And ideally this gets granted, and then you get to participate also in the international standardization meetings. Now, how is the development process for standards within ISO? So first of all, somebody needs to have an idea or a proposal saying, For example, I want to go ahead and standardize PSI protocols. If this has sufficient votes or support, then first a preliminary work item would be created. And as part of that, there would be calls for contribution that would ask questions like, which type of PSI protocol do you think should be standardized, and so on. And after a couple of rounds, this will have reached some conclusion, and then the initiators might hand in a new project proposal, which then sets out what exactly should be standardized and what are essentially, and providing some evidence that the requirements for standardization are met. If this proposal then has sufficient support from all the national standardization bodies, this will be considered an approved working item. And then the editors who are appointed can go ahead and start actually drafting these standard documents. And of course, there will be a bunch of iterations, so the editors will put out a draft, and all the national experts will provide their comments. Then these comments are merged and addressed. And at some point when this is somewhat stable, this moves on to the committee draft stage, and then there's a whole other pipeline at the bottom that helps to push this over the finish line, similar to getting like a camera-ready version of a paper published. So they're like, I don't know, finalized committee draft international standard, final draft international standard, proof, and then finally this is considered an international standard. You might think that's a fairly extensive process. How much time does this take? So there are essentially the option to choose between 3 different timeline models that range between 18 and 36 months. And I think it's fairly common that people apply for the 36 months, simply because if you don't manage to finish on time, then your project will just be cancelled. So it's better to choose like the maximum time frame and then potentially finish early. And the only way these models differ is essentially in this draft stage where you work on your working drafts and committee drafts, but the whole publication timeline in the end is the same. Now, what are the requirements to get something standardized? So for this, the working group 2 has a standing document 5, which sets out the criteria, and there might be additional criteria in the relevant standards in their appendices. I have listed some example criteria here, particularly relating to encryption mechanisms. So your mechanism should have at least a security level of 128-bit. It must be in the public domain for at least 3 years, and there should be no licensing issues. And now if you combine this number of 3 years here together with the 36 months in the previous slide, then it should be obvious that it takes at least 6 years from some academic work that has been published to appear in a standard document. So the idea here is not to standardize the latest and greatest, but to choose some more mature and safe option. Of course, there should be no known feasible cryptanalysis attacks on the protocol that you want to standardize, but it might of course be that the paper has just not received enough interest to somebody do cryptanalysis, so that's why there's the additional criterion of having at least one cryptanalysis paper published in a peer-reviewed journal. And finally, there's the point that you must evidence industry adoption. So you cannot just push for any theoretical result to get standardized if nobody has shown interest in that. For MPC, it might be sometimes a bit tricky to figure out if somebody is using a particular protocol in practice, but luckily there are now repositories like this database managed by UC Berkeley that lists existing MPC deployments, and then if you hand in your NP proposal document, then you can reference, for example, to that. When a standard is published, it's not like a static document, but it's more like a living document that undergoes periodic review, and the outcome of that review can result in a number of changes. So first there are amendments, which I would essentially say are minor revisions that correct some errors and clarify some definitions. There can also be like a major revision when there, for example, is a new encryption mechanism included in the encryption standard. There can be super minor technical corrections, and the most severe outcome of a review would be to withdraw a standard, which has happened in the past, most probably with this case of the dual EC random bit generator, which turned out to be backdoored. So this had to be withdrawn and was just recently replaced with a brand new standard on random bit generation. Now, of course, I also want to talk about a bit what it really means to participate in standardization activities. So it's certainly fair to say that there will be a lot of emails. So essentially, every morning you wake up, you will have at least these items in your inbox that will contain various action points for you. For example, to respond to these call for contributions when somebody asks your opinion on specific protocols. You're supposed to provide comments on working and commentary drafts when they are circulated. You can vote on all sorts of things. For example, if you want to support a new project proposal. And then there are other documents to review, like revisions to the standing documents. There are also regular meetings. First, there are international meetings of the ISO working group, and these usually happen 2 or 3 times per year. And ideally, you have obtained travel funding to go in person, but I should mention they are also hybrid. But from personal experience, I can say it's not fun to wake up at whatever 3 AM UK time to participate in a hybrid meeting on standardization. In addition, there are national committee meetings, usually ahead of these international meetings, to coordinate amongst the national committee and to discuss potential responses to certain debatable topics. And these are the tasks for essentially everybody who's a regular member of the working group. But in addition, it can of course happen that you volunteer to be a co-editor for a standard. And in that case, you have to actively develop those drafts that are circulated. Then you have to merge and address all the comments that you receive back. And these can be like hundreds of comments. And then at the international meetings, you are supposed to lead the discussions and discuss comments that are not straightforward to resolve. Now, with this background on ISO standardization in mind, there are currently 2 documents already published on MPC standards. So the ISO IEC 4922 is currently a 3-part standard. Part 1 is the general part, which just specifies definitions, terminology, and processes in order to establish some taxonomy and enable interoperability. So of course they define again the general model for MPC computation. They specify the fundamental requirements, which are of course correctness and input privacy, but also leave room for optional properties like fairness and guaranteed output delivery. They specify the adversary models, which are essentially all the standard ones. And then define the performance properties for comparison or comparing different options, which then relate to the computational and communication efficiency. Now, there's also, in 2024, there was published part 2 to that standard, which then specifies mechanisms based on secret sharing. So another existing ISO standard on secret sharing defines essentially Shamir's and replicated additive secret sharing. And in these sharing semantics, there are a bunch of protocols standardized. So addition, subtraction, multiplication by constant is fairly trivial. They provide also secure shared random number generation protocols, both computationally secure and information theoretically secure versions. And then finally, there's a whole host of different multiplication and dot product protocols within these sharing semantics. Okay, so this is everything that was published so far. Now, what is ongoing? What's the road ahead? So in the ISO working group, there's currently ongoing work on a part 3 of that standard, and that will relate to mechanisms based on garbled circuits. And I guess it's no big secret that this will probably lead to a standardization of the half gates mechanism with the free XOR property. But at some point, people of course realized that it doesn't make sense to have a standard on garbled circuits if you don't have a standard on how to do OT. So there are a bunch of ongoing activities relating to oblivious transfer, which will likely lead to, again, a more general document defining like roles and functionalities of parties participating in OT, and then concrete protocols for base OT and OT extension. And the general approach that is followed in all these activities currently is to focus on passive security first, and then during a potential revision, add maliciously security protocols later. Beyond ISO, there are also ongoing NIST activities. So NIST has published this call within the multi-party threshold crypto project, which aims to standardize things like a threshold, ETDSA, which might not be super relevant for most of us, but should be noted that as part of the primitives they are considering in category 2, which is the category of primitives that have not yet been standardized by NIST, there are also appearing things like garbled circuits. Then NIST also has the privacy enhancing crypto project, which aims to develop a set of reference materials to essentially better understand PAC. And I think a bunch of you have also participated in this workshop in September last year that had even dedicated days to specialized protocols like PSI. However, a discussion point that also came up in this NIST workshop is that it's currently not yet super clear what to prioritize and what to standardize first. So this is not exhaustive, this is just a bunch of random terms that came to mind when creating this slide. But essentially, it would be good to have some like direction and a kind of priority list to address, simply because there's so many options, there's so many specialized protocols, so many trade-offs to consider, that it's hard to say, okay, we want to have an MPC standard on that particular thing. Now, at this point, I would like to make a comparison, or at least look at what the competition is doing. So it should be noted that within the HE community, there are currently significant ongoing standardization efforts by ISO. So I have shown you this a nice little 3-part standard relating to MPC, but the ongoing activities relating to standardizing HE are significantly bigger. So there will be a lot of more output coming soon relating to those techniques. And also the participation activities you can see within this working group are significantly stronger for HE. So I wouldn't say it's a magnitude stronger, but at least 4 times or so. So it can happen that there's a call for contributions relating to oblivious transfer, and then there are like less than 10 responses from national experts like worldwide, whereas for HE, I don't know, there may be like, I don't know, 30, 40 active participations. The HE community has also published already in 2018 an HE community standard, and this document was recently supplemented with some community-driven security guidelines. And moreover, the HE community already since 2017 has been running a series of standard workshops to essentially synchronize on all the activities within the different standardization bodies, to have working groups driving specific aspects like the security guidelines forward, and then to synchronize again on these activities. not sure how I'm doing with time, but anyway, let's conclude this presentation. So first of all, I hope I was able to convey that standards are important. I have shown you the initial efforts that are ongoing relating to MPC standardization. So we have seen everything that has been published and essentially what is in the pipeline for the various standardization bodies. But the most important and third point is that it would be great if there is like more engagement from the MPC community within these standardization bodies. And I hope I've shown you the way to try to engage in this. And I also wonder if there should be some more unified community effort similar to the HE community. So, for example, I've seen that the MPC Alliance now co-organizes this real-world MPC workshop, and I just wonder if there should be a similar type of workshop like MPCS to talk about standardization activities and then come up with a unified strategy and a strong participation in the standardization committees. All right, with that, I would like to open the discussion. So I would be very interested to hear what are your thoughts about MPC standardization, what you think about the current status that you have seen, and what you think is the best way forward. With that, I would like to thank you and looking forward to the discussion.
Question?
Hi, Christian. Thanks a lot for your talk. I have two questions. One is, in many MPC protocols, even checking things like whether it satisfies 128 bits of security and so on really depends on the tightness of the security proof and so on. So whenever such proposals are submitted, are there like a team of cryptographers that look at it and see how things work out? That's one question. The second question is, a lot of these standards are, I think, maybe useful and have greater adoption when you're talking about it in the consumer context, where you're rolling it out as a good privacy feature for individuals like us. But in my experience, it's been harder to convince, for example, chief security officers of companies that they need to use these kinds of technologies to protect enterprise data. So have you come across instances where companies are happy with ISO standardization, where they are saying, this is good enough for us, we will go ahead with protecting enterprise data in this context? So, thanks.
Thanks for the questions. Sorry, can you remind me, what was the first one? Like
The first one was, are there a team of cryptographers that...
yeah, the security verification. Yeah. So I think at this point it's actually not handled that like super careful. For example, if you look at like the Gabel circuit technique with like half gates and free XOR and point and permute, then you have, for example, have this 1-bit security loss. So strictly speaking, with standard parameters for 128-bit security, you don't even have like 128-bit security, right? But the current way of handling this is just to acknowledge this clearly in the standards document. So for example, that will have a note saying that, look, if you choose this parameter, then you will actually have like whatever kappa minus X security loss in the ultimate protocol. And to your second question, which was roughly about convincing people that having like standardized protocols are important, I would say, so again, this probably refers back to my motivation slide, that you can point out the cost reductions and the benefits you can gain from implementing standardized procedures. For example, in the past few days, I had a bunch of water bottles that prominently advertised on the back that the company is following ISO 9001:2015 standards, which is something about quality management. And I think a lot of these arguments can help to convince decision makers that it's important to participate in standardization activities, but then also to follow these standards that are published.
Other question?
Thanks. Hey, thanks for the nice talk. So I had a question about a small remark that you made, which is the standardization of garbage circuits. You mentioned that half gates is close to being standardized with free XOR and so on. I was just curious because I thought free XOR had a patent on it from many years ago. Did that get in the way, or is that not an issue?
So the patent situation regarding free XOR apparently is that the patent expired a bunch of years back. So if you go on the Google patent search and look for free XOR, then you can see a remark that a bunch of years back, essentially nobody paid the fee to extend the patent. So for that reason, it kind of expired early and therefore seems to be free to use.
Question? Okay. Then let's thank Christian again. Thanks a lot for the nice talk.
Thank you.
So let me introduce the second speaker, the second invited speaker. So it's Yashwant Kondi. Yashwant is currently a principal scientist at Science Laboratories, where he conducts research on cryptographic protocol and multi-party computation in particular. His interests include threshold signature, zero-knowledge proofs, and problems that emerge as MPC matures as a technology. Prior to this, he earned his PhD from Northeastern University, and he spent a year as a postdoc at Aarhus University. Yashwant will give a talk from the name MPC Agnosticism, a theory of the practice of multi-party computation. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that nice introduction. Okay, so that's it. I think, unless I missed something in Christian's slides, I think I have the honor of inaugurating the What is MPC slide for this workshop. So if you have a bunch of parties, each of whom have some private input that they want to compute on jointly, they would ideally like to have access to some sort of trusted oracle that takes these inputs privately from each of these parties, computes the output, and returns this output without any sort of extra additional leakage. Of course, such trusted parties don't exist in the real world, and so we have MPC protocols in which there are concrete messages that these parties compute in exchange with each other in order to achieve the effect of computing this output without any extra leakage. So on the journey from theory to practice in MPC, it's like a commonly acknowledged starting point that this work of Yao from the 80s that showed that a pair of millionaires could learn who's richer without exchanging any additional information. So that showed the feasibility of two-party computation in a way. And then there's subsequent work by Goldrack, McCulley, and Wigderson that showed that really you can have MPC amongst any number of parties with any corruption threshold. And there's subsequent work by Benau, Goldwasser, Wigderson, and Chamkrepo-Damkot that show that in the honest majority setting, you can actually have information theoretic protocols. And these protocols are actually quite efficient right out of the box. And again, like sort of arbitrary milestones that I've picked, the Fairplay compiler from now almost more than 20 years ago did have a lot of impact on people in the sense that it showed that these constructions from the 80s, which are these sort of theoretical feasibility results, are things that you can actually write code for and you can like have in front of you running on a computer. And there's the famous Danish sugar beets auction, which showed that MPC can be run at scale and can achieve meaningful things in the real world. Right. And yeah, since then, this has really been a universe of works that's flourished since the 80s, and you can really draw any constellation through these things to justify any narrative you want, right? So in this journey of theory to practice, I think it's important to clarify what we mean by practical. There are many subjective dimensions. Right? So you could think of things like ease of implementation of the code base and like maintenance and so forth. Also, other practical concerns that come up when we're implementing cryptography, like making sure that we have constant time code that plugs all sorts of side channels and so on. Also, if we want to flourish as a community and we want more people to participate, we need robust tooling that's easy to access and these sort of things. For this audience, I think it's probably most interesting to talk about concrete efficiency. Right? If we want to design, if you want MPC to be practical, one of the necessary conditions is to have protocols that at least theoretically run with the efficiency that seems to match the constraints that we have in practice. Okay, so what does it mean for matching these constraints and so on? And like, how have we measured progress of our community in terms of what kind of practicality we can support, or what kind of applications we can support? So MPC complexity, or conversely MPC friendliness, are these like vague terms that I'm going to use through this talk, which historically have roughly corresponded to the nonlinearity of the function that we are computing in the MPC. Right? So very roughly, if we're using secret sharing schemes that support linear operations for free, which a lot of natural secret sharing schemes do, and those form the basis of our modern MPC protocols, the number of AND gates in Boolean circuits or the number of multiplication gates in arithmetic circuits usually influence or determine how much of a pain point it is going to be to compute this function securely in an MPC context. So that kind of, historically we've used like what's the throughput as a way to measure how much we progressed in terms of practicality or whatever, right? But this holds true for generic MPC, but for a lot of specific applications, we typically need tailored protocols that do certain subtasks. Like commonly recurring ones include things like private set intersection or converting shares, converting secret shares to different formats amongst each other and so on. And all of these optimizations typically depend on the context in which these protocols are being used. Like every setting tends to throw up its own challenges. And I claim, or rather the central thesis of this talk is that there are broadly two kinds of deployment contexts that we can think about. One is an MPC-centric context, in which, never mind everything else that's going on in the world, the thing that really matters to us now is this functionality that we want to compute in a distributed way. So as a protocol designer, I can really use any tools I want in order to achieve this particular functionality. I can use partition commitments, I can use some specific kind of homomorphic encryption, whatever, right? Structure the inputs and outputs however I want. And I define this in contrast to an MPC agnostic context, in which it's not just the MPC in isolation. Really what we care about is integrating into a larger context, right? Integrating into a larger system. And it really matters to be, or it's really a necessary requirement that we're able to match the interface that the outside world expects of us from this MPC. And given that this compatibility is a first-class concern, this may introduce some sources of tension in the protocol design. Like we may not be able to use all the tools that we want. So going back to our what is MPC slide, usually in the MPC-centric context, we think about more abstract functionalities, right? So how do we construct n-party signing? How do we construct secure inferencing? Or how do we construct protocols for secure decryption and so on? And research along this line is typically viewed, or I think it's typically viewed as addressing a sort of fundamental difficulty of this functionality. This kind of addresses what is the MPC complexity of this function and how can we realize it efficiently, given that we want to do this task. And zooming out a bit, in an MPC agnostic context, this system or this MPC doesn't really exist in isolation. It really has to connect with the rest of the world. And the rest of the world includes like phones and laptops and servers and computers and all sorts of things. And these standards are set independently of this or whatever I'm doing in this MPC. Right? So the rest of the world doesn't really care that I'm using an MPC, and all the rest of the world cares about is that this system, for which I happen to be using MPC, has an interface that conforms to certain standards and specifications. So there's this old adage on the internet that on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Like, as long as you're behind your screen, you have your screen name, you interact on your forums, do whatever you want. Like, nobody really cares who's behind it, right? And I guess extending that logic here, like, nobody really cares on the internet if you're running MPC, right? As long as you send messages that conform to the protocol standards, that's all that matters. So in the MPC agnostic context, we tend to look at more concrete problem statements, like how do we construct n-party ECDSA signing, as opposed to how do we construct n-party signing as an abstract tool. Or how do we construct this particular key encapsulation thing in MPC, as opposed to just abstractly how do you do threshold decryption or something. Also, like secure evaluation of some specific model, as opposed to just abstractly how do we do inferencing. So on the one hand, there is this tendency to think that the fact that we have to conform to these outside standards and specifications, it introduces what are like artificial problems. As an MPC researcher, I could say, you know what, if they just change the standards to be more MPC friendly, then this is really not a problem MPC-wise. So this is not an MPC problem. I'm not really interested in studying it. Fundamentally, the problem of, let's say, n-party CDSA signing is not necessarily related to the problem of n-party signing itself as an abstract tool. Right? So it's doesn't really correspond, or it's kind of decoupled from the MPC complexity in a fundamental sense. But we have to acknowledge that internet scale standards are really standards for any larger system in which MPC is not the thing that everyone cares about at the top of their priority list. These standards are unlikely to be set with MPC friendliness as a first-class concern. Right? If assuming that only like 0.1% of the users in the overall system are using MPC, like the 99.9% of the users are not going to do extra things just to accommodate that small minority. And so if we're interested in deploying MPC more generally, we have to think about addressing these problems as necessary regardless of whether or not they're artificial, as in regardless of whether they are directly, they're directly tied to the MPC complexity of whatever task. So it's not all negative. I think as a researcher, these problems, like addressing these problems can still be interesting technically speaking. And I'd like to illustrate this through two specific lines of research that I've been looking at lately. So the first is multi-party signing, because signature standards on the internet tend not to be MPC friendly. And the other is open finance. And I'll say more about these applications as I get into them. So the first is that of threshold signing, which is joint work with Jack Turner, Issa Lee, and Abhi Shalat. So let's consider this application, or just consider this use case. Let's say our friend Bitcoin Bob has a bunch of Bitcoin that he keeps on his laptop, and it's secured with a secret key. To give some context, how the secret key is used is, in case he wants to pay his friend Alice some number of Bitcoin, Bob pushes a button on his laptop, uses his key to sign a message, and he attaches the signature so that Alice is able to claim the funds that he would like to send her. Now, let's say that it turns out that somewhere in Bob's software stack, let's say some unnamed OS, has some sort of vulnerability. It could turn out that an attacker turns up, maybe breaks Windows, and is able to use some cool techniques to get Bob's key out of his laptop. And once the attacker has Bob's key, she is basically able to sign any message and drain Bob's funds and also take away all of his cool things. And this is a bad situation. So what threshold signing allows Bob to do is to take his key, split it into multiple parts, and keep each part on a different device, so that each of these devices, when Bob wants, they can instantiate some sort of signing oracle and produce a signature at the end of the day that Bob can use. And the point of this distribution is to allow Bob to distribute his risk, so that an attacker who wants to steal his key has to really hack into multiple devices. So it's a defense in depth type situation. So fundamentally, this problem is not that complex if you think about this as just an MPC-centric problem. Right? So there are a lot of signature schemes that allow for very efficient MPC protocols. If you think about BLS, it's well known that threshold signing or multi-party signing is trivial. If you think about Schnorr or RedDSA, which is an even older scheme that's based on even more fundamental assumptions, Schnorr is entirely linear and has a simple 3-round signing protocol, right? And to sort of get into that a little bit, but not too much, basically Schnorr signing starts by sampling some random nonce, and then the signature itself is a simple linear combination of the secret key and the nonce. the details aren't super important. The single-party algorithm maps to an MPC in a very clean way. It takes a couple of rounds to do this interactive, to do an interactive version of this non-sampling, and then just one round to finally finish assembling the signature. So it's one of these famous stories in the history of cryptography, I guess, which is that the adoption of Schnorr was hampered by a patent. There was a patent in, I don't remember which year, probably the late 80s, that became very relevant during the standardization effort for signature schemes in the 90s. So ECDSA, which was proposed by Vanstone also in the early 90s, is morally from the same family of cryptography. So at least at a very high level, security proofs notwithstanding, we believe ECDSA to be secure for roughly the same reasons as Schnorr, because it comes from this sort of discrete logarithm-based line of cryptography, even though the security proof is really not as nice. So the point of ECDSA is that even though it's from the same family, it's just different enough from Schnorr that if it was found in court, that it actually doesn't, the Schnorr patent doesn't apply to ECDSA. And this fact allowed ECDSA to be standardized, or DSA at the time to be standardized. And it has seen wide adoption across the internet since then. I mean, it took a few decades, but now ECDSA is quite commonly found in like certificates and blockchains and so have you. So unfortunately, it turns out, like this is a classic example of why MPC friendliness you can't take it for granted to be a first-class concern in standards, which is that the difference that allowed ECDSA to be standardized also happens to be something that makes MPC kind of difficult. So why is this? So the first half of ECDSA is the same as Schnorr. It involves sampling a random nonce. The second half of ECDSA is this kind of weird nonlinear combination of the signing key and the nonce. So usually we measure MPC complexity in terms of nonlinear operations, and this is the thing that makes life kind of complicated for ECDSA. So this has inspired a long line of work since DSA and ECDSA as standardized schemes. That it's progressed quite a bit, and particularly in recent years because of its application to cryptocurrency custody and so on, there's been a lot of research on ECDSA signing. In fact, there's a very interesting talk that's even coming up later in the program on this. What I wanted to say was that it's taken a while, but in our work, through a couple of papers, we've constructed this somewhat, at least what I think is a somewhat clean framework for ECDSA that looks a little bit like Schnorr, at least, in that the first couple of rounds, like we can spend a couple of rounds doing this interactive non-sampling. We have a bit of machinery on the side to take care of that nonlinearity that ECDSA gives us, and also in parallel with this machinery, we can do this sort of simple check that has a very simple statistical analysis, and finally just reveal a linear combination of values, and yeah, that gives us multi-party ECDSA signing. Yeah, without really getting into comparisons or anything like this, what I'd like to say about it is that we are at this point where now even we have audited production libraries that do ECDSA signing, and realistically for most applications, threshold ECDSA signing can now run at latency that doesn't really matter for the real world. Or for many applications, the latency that threshold ECDSA adds is not so bad, even though it's a few orders of magnitude slower than single-party signing. And it's fairly widely used nowadays. The other application that I want to talk about is newer and sort of ongoing work with Nidish Premrajkar, Daniel Noble, and Supriya Varadarajan. And this is that of open finance. So what is open finance? It's very roughly a framework that allows users to move their financial data across different institutions, possibly to gain something from exposing their data to different people. So, for example, if I'm trying to apply for a loan, or if I'm trying to rent an apartment or something like this, it's important for me to prove my financial health to the person who's going to be giving me these things. Right now, in a lot of cases, this process is kind of heuristic. It's I go to the bank or I go to whatever with my physical printouts of my bank statements or something like this. And unfortunately, common thing that we have to do, or even I had to do this, I had to like log into my bank account on some third-party platform, and that platform took a screenshot of my bank statement and like did some analysis. It's very heuristic and very prone to security breaches and so on. So open finance frameworks aim to replace these heuristics with at least more rigorous cryptographic protocols, or protocols with more rigorous guarantees. And the account aggregator framework in India is one such example. And that's going to be relevant for this talk. To say a bit more about it, an account aggregator allows users to consolidate their financial information across multiple FIPs, the financial information providers. You can think of these as banks and so on. And upon the user giving consent to move the data from their FIPs, the account aggregator allows FIUs, financial information users, so you can think about this as insurance underwriters or loan granting authorities and so on. It allows them to see whatever the user wants them to see about their bank statement. So according to Samati, which is the regulator, or which is the body that maintains standards and so on for account aggregator in India, this is a pretty large, there's a pretty large user base already, and it's already growing, tens of millions of users, hundreds of institutions involved and so on. But there are still issues that persist in this framework for bridging gaps in incentives, and also in some single points of failure and security and so on. And by complete coincidence, we decided that MPC is the best way to solve this. Anyway, so this is the rough outline of what the different actors in the system are and what they provide, what they get in return. So the FIP, which provides the data D, is a link to the user device, who then, the device of the owner then provides consent for this data to be mobilized from the FIP to the FIU through the account aggregator. The account aggregator is basically like an encrypted pipeline. The FIU, upon receiving this data, does whatever processing it wants and then gives services to users based on the outcome of this analysis. So at the end of the day, the user gets these services from the FIU. The FIU has some business model that makes sense to it, and the account aggregator gets some fees from the FIU. This is concretely what happens right now. And you can already see that there's a bit of a gap over here, that the FIP gets nothing at the end. But possibly of much greater concern is the fact that the FIU gets to see the clear text data by itself, right? I mean, entirely unrestricted. So this could be a problem. If there's some sort of issue, security issue on the FIU side, unrestricted reuse of this plain text data that's exposed to the FIU could then cause problems that ripple through the ecosystem. Right? Specifically, if there's imagine that there's a data breach or some sort of insider attack that leads to the FIU's data being leaked, the users whose data this corresponds to, they lose control over their data. They could end up in all kinds of places. And also on a macro level, FIPs maintain user data as like their own proprietary commercial information, and leakage of this proprietary data of FIPs does harm their business. So to our knowledge, there are heuristic solutions that FIPs already use in practice, which is that they throttle response rates. So let's say they only respond to like 10% of the incoming requests or something like this to kind of stem the leakage of their data. So on the one hand, this does undermine the ecosystem, because now the account aggregator ecosystem, which is supposed to be a secure and efficient way of delivering data, is no longer actually delivering this data. And on the other hand, it's not very useful from a cryptographic point of view, because it still leaks data anyway. So what we would really like in this situation is a compliance by design kind of approach, which makes sure that by design, the protocol itself doesn't allow these things to happen. So this is roughly the workflow for the account aggregator ecosystem. It begins with the user consenting to share data, and upon receiving a request from the FIU to share, to receive this data, the account aggregator then accepts a public key from the FIU and forwards this public key to the FIP, who then returns an encrypted response. And this encrypted response is then forwarded to the FIU. And finally, the FIU is able to decrypt the data and process it as it wishes. So if you inspect this for a minute, you'll see that the only single point of failure, or at least a single point of failure that's relevant to the concerns that I brought up, is the FIU, because it has the full secret key and therefore the full data in the overall system. So our proposal is to decentralize the single point of failure by having a system of FICUs, these are financial information compute units, which will be carefully chosen, that I'll talk about. And these FICUs instead emulate the role of this FIU in a distributed way. So specifically, we propose a system that has 3 FICU nodes, which are chosen in a way that they are incentivized not to collude. So FIUs are interested in the utility of data. So one of the nodes could be operated by an FIP or maybe a proxy of the FIP that is interested in minimizing the data exposure, so it doesn't want to expose data. And finally, the infrastructure provider who's interested in maintaining the integrity of the system, right? Who wants to make sure that the account aggregator system is overall trustworthy and people believe in it. So the aim of the system is to make sure that any user data at any point is always secret shared and accessible only by MPC, which means that no individual party is able to steal the data. Or even if any individual party were to be breached, then data still stays safe. And this also does allow us to change participation incentives, given that there's now a node on the data processing side that represents the FIP's interest. This gives us a way of maybe quantifying how useful data is. In general, it's pretty hard to reward someone for providing data because it's difficult to quantify how useful it is. And this, maybe we can start thinking about how to do this by measuring how often is this data accessed and for what and so on, and compensate FIPs accordingly. So zooming on now the technical problem, we now have 3 parties with no colluding pairs, also known as an honest majority. So there's exactly one actively corrupt node at any given time. And we can divide the MPC tasks into 3 phases. The first is to obtain this data through the account aggregator workflow. Then the second is to structure this data in such a way that we can operate on it easily within MPC. And the third is to actually do things online, like run the MPC queries that we want. Sorry, run the function queries that we want. So it may look kind of weird that I brought up the second phase, which is sort of a strange logistical thing. But this just parsing the decrypted data turns out to be the most painful part within MPC, at least as of now. And I'd like to say more about this. So to begin with, we have decryption, which begins with getting some sort of public ciphertext as an input, and then performing some sort of secret share decryption, so that at the end of the day, each party has a secret share of the plaintext. So if we express MPC decryption as an abstract task, this is not that hard. Like, there are bespoke realizations for this particular kind of functionality. But if we want to be compatible with the standards, right, this like large account aggregator ecosystem that exists independently of us, then this becomes a bit challenging because encryption is run by AES, where the AES key is some secret shared thing. Sorry, the AES key is derived by some sort of key encapsulation process. So concretely, it looks something like this. The AES key is SHA applied to like this Diffie-Hellman type key encapsulation, like G to the power SK times R. So why this is kind of tricky to handle in MPC is because the G to the SKR thing is best represented with elliptic group operations, whereas AES and SHA are best operated on as Boolean circuits. So inspired by previous work, there's the share conversion work of Mohasel Rindal, and also this more recent work on oblivious TLS, which is structurally quite similar by Abram et al. We show that you can emulate group operations in ZP, like integers modulo the base field of the integers modulo P, where P is the base field of the prime that defines the base field of the elliptic curve group. So we now convert elliptic group operations to arithmetic operations, or like an arithmetic secret sharing, and then convert the arithmetic secret sharing into Boolean secret sharing through known techniques in this setting. So yeah, that's fine to handle. And honestly, I thought this is where the difficulty would end in terms of integration. But the real challenge in this setting turned out to be just parsing the decrypted data. So after we decrypt this ciphertext, what we end up with is an XML file, right, that has a bunch of transactions that are formatted as follows. Each transaction has a bunch of fields. This is a somewhat simplified view. There's some sort of identifier, an amount, some narrative information, and timestamp. So think about how you would parse this in plain text, right? The first thing is to tokenize this string into like smaller parts so that each part can then be cast into whatever data type we want. And yeah, I mean, this is, at least from an overall algorithmic point of view, not that complicated. But now what about this situation where the data is actually secret shared and we don't know where anything is in the file, right? So let's try parsing this in MPC. The first step is to figure out where the delimiters are, so try and do some sort of secure tokenization. So let me begin by exposing where the white spaces are, because white spaces are the delimiters. But it turns out that this already leaks something. Specifically, if you look at the length of each field, this induces some very annoying leakage. So if I'm trying to distinguish whether the encrypted file has one out of these two values, whether the amount field is 54 or the amount field is 104, the fact that the 54 thing leads to a 10-character representation of this value versus 104 leads to 11 characters, this already tells us what's inside that ciphertext. So just exposing where the delimiters are is already insecure. Like, we can't do this in a naive way. So imagine we lived in a world in which the account aggregator ecosystem was very excited that MPC is now being used in it, and they decided that they're going to make sure that every field in the string is going to be has a pre-specified maximum length, so that we can do this parsing thing very trivially, right? So you can directly expose where the white spaces are and parse things accordingly. We do not live in this world because it turns out that not everyone is as excited as MPC is we were. So our goal is to get to a stage where we have effectively that. So using MPC, we're going to construct a string that incorporates the padding that we need to make the white spaces and so on safe to reveal. Right, so we begin with a simplified view of how this works. So let's say we had a maximum row length for each of these fields, let's say 10 characters in this case. What we want to do is get to a stage where the gap between the actual field value and what the maximum field length is all padded, right? I mean, has some sort of special padding character. In this case, is hash. I want to observe at this point that the number of padding characters is already public information, because let's say we know what the actual length of the string is, and we know what the maximum possible length of the string is. Just the difference between these two tells us how many padding characters we need. The tricky thing now is to figure out where these padding characters should go in the string. So writing out our string over here, which is in secret shared form, we begin by computing an array that tells us where the delimiters are in secret shared form. So 0 if a given index is a delimiter, 1 otherwise. And doing some more things, we can then get to the stage where we have secret shares of the relative index of each value from the last delimiter. So the distance from the last delimiter. So yeah, we don't need the first thing anymore, so I'm going to throw it away. Once we have the relative index, that is how far it is from the last delimiter, we can then compute an absolute index, which is if at the end of this padding process, we had indices for each of the values in the padded string, what would that index be? Right? So absolute index tells us post-padding what is the index of each of these values. And that's not too complicated to calculate, given that we have these previous values. So that's the first half of the problem, to figure out what the absolute index is of every character from the original string. And now we have to figure out where the padding characters have to go. So let's say we start with the assumption that every character needs to be a padding character. But this is not true. What we actually want is just a small number of padding characters to bridge the gap between the actual value and the padded value. So we begin with kind of a similar process. We start marking the indices where we actually want the padding values. And then we are in a straightforward way able to compute the absolute indices of where these would be. Right? So this absolute index field for the padding values are perfectly complementary to the absolute indices of the secret shared values, or of the actual values in some sense. So with some amount of, with a few gadgets, we can basically throw away the indices that aren't going to make it to the final value, like basically the padding characters that we don't actually need. And we get to a stage where we have two secret shared arrays, which contain the absolute indices of each value at the end. So basically, we have two arrays of secret shared indices that are perfectly complementary to each other. So all that remains to be done is to merge them. And that's what we do. We can, through a secure merging protocol, get to a stage where each of the fact that we mapped each value to its absolute index and each padded value to its absolute index gives us an overall completely padded string. And now this is safe to reveal delimiters or what have you. We can actually do a little bit better than that, and whatever, we're done with the parsing process. So very roughly, the efficiency of this protocol is not that bad. It's a constant, per character, it's a constant number of additions, comparisons, and share conversions between Boolean and arithmetic. And it's a constant number of shuffles. Basically, if we want to operate on data without really revealing where this data is in a vector, then we need to do something where we shuffle and reveal and so on. And this gives us a protocol that is independent of the file size, which is important as the file size scales as we process. And we have an implementation of this and is being integrated at the moment. And it's at the moment about on the order of a few minutes to pass a somewhat small bank statement. But the important thing is that it pulls directly from the actual account aggregator API. And yeah, we have a pilot plan for the future, which is kind of ongoing, and I'll maybe have more to say about this in a few months. So those are a couple of applications that I wanted to talk about in this MPC agnostic kind of way of looking at things. And there are open problems, of course, directly. This is maybe the first cut of a parsing protocol. There's so many things you can do to optimize parsing, threshold decryption, and so on in the open finance case. Also in threshold ECDSA, this is still an active area of research. Like I mentioned earlier, there's this interesting talk later on in the program. There are questions to think about around complexity. How do you de-randomize threshold signing the same way you would for single-party signing and so on? And there are so many problems beyond this. For example, if you think about post-quantum threshold signing, there are a lot of very interesting constructions nowadays that give you multi-signatures and so on from lattices. But to my knowledge, we don't really have any baselines for standards-compatible post-quantum threshold signing that we could use in a plug-and-play way with existing lit standards, let's say Falcon Dilithium or Sphinx or whatever. And also applications beyond this, you could think about maybe the function itself is something that you get from somewhere else, and it really matters that you exactly compute this function. So floating point arithmetic is one of these examples, because not all programs are well behaved when you switch from floating point to fixed point approximations. And so there's this really nice work by Rati et al. That gives these scenarios in which it becomes important to make sure that the MPC also does floating point arithmetic accurately. Very interesting stuff. Okay, so more broadly, we can think about, at the level at which, CSOs or whatever are making decisions about which technology to use. MPC is just one possible technology out of a whole range of them. I think of maybe different branded things like confidential computing or trusted execution environments and so on. And as a community, if you want to make MPC more viable as an option in these types of scenarios, we need to think about how do we support these drop-in replacement kind of gadgets, right? For settings where MPC is maybe not the first thing that the standards prioritize. So as maybe one kind of bellwether for this way of thinking, the zero-knowledge community is already doing really great work on supporting, let's say, proofs of legacy signature schemes and so on. So to add advanced functionalities to legacy schemes. Also improving provenance of TLS data and that kind of thing, which is, I find, pretty cool. And yeah, I think that these kinds of problems can be technically interesting. These are just a couple of them. There are so many problems that came before this, so many that will be there after, during. I'm sure people in the audience have many examples of cool things that they're working on that also kind of fall in this line of MPC agnostic research and so on. I'd be happy to hear about those and maybe open up the thing for discussion and so on. Thanks for your attention.
Question.
Hi, thanks Akshan for the nice talk. I have a small question regarding this non-colluding servers. So this is a typical reviewer question. How do you basically set up this non-colluding servers? And in the slide you mentioned it's incentivized, right? So what is the incentive that you are going to give to them? How do you make sure the system is working in this non-colluding fashion?
Right, so it's not formal financial, not formal incentives, like the thing where you get penalized if you are caught about cheating or whatever. It's more of the parties or the entities that operate the systems are more broadly trying to achieve different things, and if they were to collude, that would compromise the things that they want to achieve. So, for example, the infrastructure provider wants to make sure that their infrastructure is safe, or their infrastructure is seen as credible for people to use. So they aren't incentivized to collude to expose data. The FIPs, who are the ones who are supplying the data, are also incentivized to keep their data secure. In fact, they're the ones who are affected at the moment, or one of the people who are affected by data breaches happening and so on. So the people who operate the nodes are chosen with the context in mind, as opposed to any formal guarantees of, if something happens, then this person is specifically penalized or something.
And given that this is our finance, like, do you employ some auditing techniques or something on top of it just to verify? Because what if they are going to like cheat? Because you are believing that they are not going to cheat, right?
I mean, it's maliciously secure, so we'll know if there's an abort, but we won't know who caused the abort.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Other question? So I do have a question. Do you think that the merging part of the protocol is a bottleneck in the parsing, or is it like a cost that is not that high? Because sorting is kind of expensive, no?
Sorting specifically in the three-party one corruption setting is maybe not that bad. It's something like every pair of parties does a sort and make sure that it's correct, and then they compose on top of each other. So, I mean, it's still like linear in the number of things, but I think that's inherent. Oh, sorry, no, that's shuffling. It's a good question. I don't remember off the top of my head what fraction of the overall cost it is, but there are other things in the protocol that are about as expensive.
Okay.
That's what I remember.
Okay.
But it's still an interesting thing to study.
Okay, thank you. So let's thank the speaker again for the great talk.
Oh. Thanks.
So we will meet after a short break at 11:40. Refreshments are available outside. You can have it. Thanks.
Welcome back, everyone. So this would be the first session of contributed speakers. The first talk will be by Neha Javalkar. She is a PhD student at IISc Bangalore, and she is going to talk about matchmaker, fast, secure inference across deployment scenarios.
All right. Is this for pointing, Akon? Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you. Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I hold this here and I lost it. Okay, it's back. Okay, great. Okay, so hello, I am Neha, and today I'm going to talk about Matchmaker, fast, secure inference across deployment scenarios. This is joint work with Nishan Chandran, Divya Gupta, Rahul Sharma, and Arkaprava Basu. So let me start by defining secure inference. So in secure inference, you have a model owner with proprietary model weights, in this case a hospital with a model for disease diagnosis, and you have a client with a query, but the query contains potentially sensitive data. In this case, it contains medical data, right? A secure inference requires that through the inference process, the model owner should learn nothing whatsoever about the client's query, and the client should learn nothing about the proprietary weights of the model. Right? Secure inference can be solved by the cryptographic technique of secure two-party computation, or 2PC. Our focus is going to be on semi-honest 2PC with pre-processing, right? Which has two phases. First, in the pre-processing phase, a trusted dealer hands out input-independent correlated randomness, or keys, to the two parties who wish to securely compute a function f. Then, in the online phase, once their inputs arrive, parties use this correlated randomness and interact with each other to securely compute f. Right? The focus in this model is on making the input dependent online phase very fast. Okay? And our focus specifically is going to be to try to improve the efficiency of the online phase across a variety of different deployment scenarios that can occur commonly in practice, with the goal of making 2PC-based secure inference more broadly applicable. Okay? So now let me talk about the factors that impact the performance of the online phase in 2PC inference. Right? The first factor that has a significant impact on performance is, of course, your network. So it matters if parties are connected to each other by a fast LAN, or if they are connected to each other by a slow WAN. Right? And this is because even the most communication efficient secure inference systems end up communicating tens of GBs of data for a reasonably sized inference task. Right? So to illustrate the current state of the art in secure CNN inference, which is Orca, communicates 16 GB of data for VGG16 inference, which means that in the LAN it's able to function relatively efficiently, and it takes only 23 seconds, but it slows down significantly in the WAN. It takes around 5 minutes, right? Which is a slowdown of more than 10x. Right? So your network can have a significant impact on performance. The second factor which significantly impacts performance, and this is unique to the pre-processing model, is the location of your correlated randomness, or keys. Okay? So existing secure inference systems make the unreasonable assumption that keys are always going to be available in CPU memory for fast access. Okay? This assumption is justified if the rate at which requests arrive is extremely low. So there is enough slack between the arrival of two successive requests to prefetch keys from storage into CPU memory, allowing for fast access at inference time. However, right, if the rate at which requests arrive is high, or if they arrive in a burst, then there is no longer any time to prefetch keys from storage into CPU memory, and you will see the latency of accessing storage in the critical path. Right? So to illustrate the impact of the location of keys, ORCA requires hundreds of GBs of correlated randomness for VGG16 inference. And if this correlated randomness is available in memory for fast access, then it needs only 23 seconds for secure inference. But if you have to read this correlated randomness from storage, then it takes almost 9 minutes, right? Which is a performance degradation of 27x. So location of keys is also crucial to performance. All right. So now a combination of network and where your keys are located very naturally gives us 4 potential deployment scenarios that can exist in practice. But before I tell you how we try to optimize for each of these 4 deployment scenarios, let me first tell you about the computation we will be performing, which is secure inference of convolutional neural networks, or CNNs. So this is what the architecture of a single CNN block looks like. And a CNN consists of many of these blocks stacked on top of each other. Like all machine learning models, CNNs have linear layers and nonlinear layers, like max pool and ReLU, and linear layers are, of course, convolutions and matrix multiplications. So linear layers can be computed very, very efficiently in the preprocessing model via beaver triples. It is the nonlinear layers that are the key computational bottleneck, and a majority of the cost of nonlinear layers is attributable to secure comparisons. So now let's talk about secure comparisons in the preprocessing model. So we can compute, there are 2 broad protocol classes that we can employ for computing secure comparison. The first class is linear secret sharing, or LSS, in which you securely compute a Boolean comparison circuit consisting of AND gates and XOR gates. XOR gates are, of course, free, and AND gates can be computed via beaver bit triples. The other way of computing secure comparison is via function secret sharing, or FSS. And FSS very loosely uses compressed unit vector correlations for secure comparison. Now, happily, LSS and FSS have performance characteristics that are very complementary to each other. Right, so LSS relies on very lightweight computation of local bitwise AND and XOR operations. It requires a small amount of correlated randomness, but it requires a large amount of communication because you need to communicate 4 bits for every AND gate that you compute securely. FSS, in contrast, requires a large amount of computation in the form of AES calls. It requires a large amount of preprocessing material, but it communicates less data compared to LSS. Okay? So to show you concretely how these 2 classes of protocols compare against each other, let me show you the key size and communication of LSS and FSS for n-bit ReLU. So as you can see, LSS has keys that are 14 times smaller than FSS keys, but FSS communicates 5x less data than LSS. Okay? Unfortunately, even though these 2 classes of protocols have complementary properties in theory, it is very difficult to see these performance characteristics in practice because existing LSS-based systems for secure inference are highly inefficient. Right? To illustrate, let me show you how the current state of the art in LSS-based secure inference, crypt10, compares against the current state of the art in FSS-based secure inference, which is ORCA. So as you can see, even though we expect LSS keys to be smaller than FSS keys, crypt10 somehow has keys that are larger than ORCA's keys, right? And even though we expect LSS to communicate about 5 times more data than FSS, crypt10 communicates 70 times more data, right? And on top of all of this, crypt10 relies quite crucially on GPUs in order to be performant, but LSS-based computation just requires a few local AND and XOR operations per secure AND gate. So it is unclear that a computationally powerful accelerator like a GPU is even required, right? So none of the nice theoretical promise of LSS is met in practice, okay? So in order to fix this, right, in order to realize the theoretical promise of LSS in practice, right, which later we will see will be especially useful for optimizing in deployment scenarios that are not friendly to FSS, right, we set out to create a new LSS-based secure inference framework, which we call LSSM, with a particular focus to fix the gaps in crypt10. So we try to have a small key, and we also try to map the lightweight LSS computation in LSS to CPUs and not GPUs. Okay, so since most of the cost of LSS-based secure inference, or any secure inference, is secure comparison, let me first tell you how we optimize LSS-based secure comparison for the CPU. Okay, so I will start by describing the structure of our comparison circuit. So here, P0, P1 have private n-bit inputs, x and y, and they want to compute x less than y. So I will define my circuit recursively. So let me first split x and y into 2 halves, x1, x0, and y1, y0. And now I will say that x is less than y if either x1 is less than y1. Nope, the pointer doesn't work. Okay. If either x1 is less than y1 or x1 is equal to y1 and x0 is less than y0. Okay, and now I need to compute equality in this equation. So I define equality recursively as well as x equals y if x1 equals y1 and x0 equals y0. Okay, so at the very bottom of the recursion, x and y are going to be single bits, in which case we simply compute the corresponding Boolean formulae for less than an equality. Right, so in order to show you how we optimize LSS-based comparison for the CPU, let us take a closer look at the circuit that we need to compute for equality. Right, so this is the circuit we need to compute for 3-bit equality. It looks a little bit like a tree. Okay, so at the very base of your tree, you compute equality of 1-bit inputs as, oh, I see. So at the very base of your comparison tree, you compute equality of 1-bit inputs. This is not the equality circuit, however. This is the less than circuit for 3-bit inputs, which is fine. But this is the computation that we're going to try and map efficiently to vector instructions that are available on modern CPUs. Okay, so a vector instruction allows you to execute a single operation, in this case a bitwise AND on many inputs in parallel. All right. So now, unfortunately for us, the structure of a comparison circuit makes it difficult to harness vector instructions efficiently, especially if this is done naively, right? So to illustrate, let me show you why this is difficult for the equality subcircuit, right? So this is the leaf level of our equality circuit, where we compute equality of 1-bit inputs as E0 equals X0 XNORed with Y0. Right, E1 equals X1 XNORed with Y1, and so on and so forth, right? And this part of the computation is easy to vectorize, right? Because the left inputs of all the XNOR gates and the right inputs of all the XNOR gates that you want to compute in parallel are already grouped together. And this is an important prerequisite for harnessing vector instructions. Left inputs and right inputs need to be separated, okay? The problem arises when you go up the equality tree to compute equality of 2-bit inputs, right? Which you will do as by computing E2 and E1, E4 and E3, and so on and so forth, right? Now, if you want to compute E2 and E1 and E4 and E3 via the same vector instruction, you first need to reorganize, right? You first need to reorganize your input to separate the left inputs and right inputs of the AND gates. Right, and this reorganization is expensive, especially when your input has non-powers of 2-bit widths. Right here, you can see that because the computation that you need in order to perform this reorganization becomes non-uniform for non-powers of 2-bit widths. Right, so here you see that the E0 is not even participating in the computation of 2-bit equality. It's just sitting there, and it will be used later at the high levels of the tree. Right, so in order to make a computation more friendly to vectorization, we first perform a bit decomposition, right? So we typically perform many secure comparisons in parallel, right? So this is what your input looks like, and we decompose the input, right? To group the first bit of all your inputs together, and the second bit, and the third bit, and so on and so forth, right? And now computing comparison on this data is much more efficient, right? So now instead of computing E1, E0, E1, E2 via the same vector instruction, you will instead compute E1 across different comparisons via the same vector instruction. Similarly, you will also compute E2 across different comparisons via the same vector instruction. Okay, and now when you go up the equality tree to compute equality of 2-bit inputs, you don't have to do any reorganization, and you can just do it. You can just vectorize as is. Okay, so the only thing that is left for us to do is to show that bit decomposition can be done efficiently, and in this case this is true, because bit decomposition simply corresponds to computing the bit transpose of your input matrix, okay, which is very friendly to vectorization. You can use vector memory instructions to load and store data elements efficiently, and you can also, of course, use vector shift and XOR instructions to accelerate the computation of the transpose itself. Okay, so what does all this work brought us? Now, if you want to compute 1,064-bit comparisons on the CPU with just 8 threads, you need 35 milliseconds, of which 28 milliseconds, or 80% of your time, is spent in communication, not computation, right? So even if you were to try and put this computation on a GPU, you would get at most 25% speed up compared to our optimized CPU implementation. All right? So we put our vectorized comparison together with standard PRF-based key compression and new LSS protocols, new LSS-based protocols to create LSSM, which is our LSS-based secure inference framework for CNNs, which runs linear layers on the GPU as systems before it, but runs non-linear layers on the CPU with just 8 threads. Okay, so now let's see how LSSM fares against Orca. So here you see that LSSM has keys that are 27 times smaller than Orca's keys, and it only communicates 1.7x more than Orca. Okay, and best of all, where Orca needs a GPU to accelerate FSS, FSS-based heavy nonlinear computation, LSSM is able to efficiently compute LSS, lightweight LSS computation on the CPU with just 8 threads. Okay, so with this, finally, we are able to match the theoretical promise of LSS in practice, right? And as a quick aside, we also build on top of Orca to create a new state-of-the-art FSS-based secure inference framework. Okay, so now very quickly going back to where we started, which was that there are two factors that impact performance, impact the performance of the online phase of 2PC, the network and the location of keys. And when you put these together, you can be in one of 4 potential deployment scenarios when you toggle the speed of the network and you toggle the location of the keys. Now let's see how LSS and FSS fare against each other in each of these 4 deployment scenarios. Okay, so when the network is slow but your keys are in memory, then FSS wins because it is more communication efficient. When your network is fast and keys are in storage, then LSS wins because it has much smaller keys than FSS, and also it is not hamstrung by the fact that it communicates a lot of data. Now, when your network is fast and keys are in memory, then both LSS and FSS perform similarly, right? And this is because both performance limiters are absent. You have LSS is no longer hamstrung by having to communicate a lot of data. I can do so over a fast network. And FSS does not need to access storage for pre-processing material. Okay? And when the network is slow and keys are in storage, then also both LSS and FSS have similar performance. And this is because now both performance limiters are present. LSS needs to communicate a lot of data over a slow network, and FSS needs to read a lot of correlated randomness from storage. Okay? So the key takeaway from this graph is that there is no single best protocol class that is optimal for all deployment scenarios. Okay? Additionally, now, because we've put our LSS computation on the CPU, right, we've made it efficient on the CPU, LSS and FSS now stress completely different parts of the computing system. FSS stresses the GPU and storage, LSS stresses the CPU and the network. Okay, which means that we are for the first time able to leverage heterogeneous computing across the CPU and GPU to use LSS and FSS simultaneously to compute nonlinear layers to improve performance. Okay, so based on your deployment scenario, any one of LSS or FSS or a combination of 2 can be optimal. So in order to ease the burden of manually deciding what is best for your particular system, we designed a tool called Matchmaker, which has 2 components to automate the process, and it has 2 components. The first is our optimized LSSM and FSSM, and the second component is profile-guided work distribution, which tells you exactly how you should mix LSS and FSS, and indeed if you should do so at all. Okay, so now let's see how Matchmaker compares against the current state-of-the-art in CNN inference, which is Orca. So the config over here tells you what fraction of nonlinearities Matchmaker is choosing to execute with LSS. Okay, so if we first look at the scenario when keys are in storage, and here we see that Matchmaker is able to beat Orca by 21x. Right? And this is because Matchmaker quite correctly, as you can tell from the configuration, chooses to rely only on LSS when the network is fast and keys are in storage. Right? Matchmaker is also able to beat Orca in the WAN setting by leveraging heterogeneous computing, so mixing LSS and FSS. Right? And the key thing to note here is that as the configuration changes, Matchmaker adapts. Right? So it chooses to distribute computation according to the key bottlenecks in the system. Okay, so the same is true of memory as well. Here also we see that Matchmaker improves performance over Orca by around 2x by, correctly, as you can tell from the fact that the configuration is different, adapting to the deployment scenario. Okay, so to conclude, There are two critical factors that impact performance of 2PC-based secure inference in the pre-processing model. The first is network speed, and the second is the location of your pre-processing material. And when you combine these two, you may be in one of 4 potential deployment scenarios. So we first create LSSM and FSSM that are best in their class secure inference frameworks that rely on LSS and FSS respectively. We then show that there is no one-size-fits-all scenarios protocol class that between LSS and FSS. And in fact, sometimes mixing LSS and FSS will give you the most optimal performance. We create a tool which we call Matchmaker to automatically choose between LSSM, FSSM, and or a mixture based on your deployment scenario. And Matchmaker adapts to different scenarios and is able to be the state of the art in secure inference by up to 21x. Thank you.
Thank you. It was very cool work. Questions?
Hi, thanks for the talk. I was wondering what kind of pre-processing material do you need for the LSS-based techniques? Is it just like multiplication triples, or is it something fancier?
No, it's just multiplication triples. Yeah, like bit triples or like triples over a ring, or well, that's it.
So it would also be easier to distribute this dealer than it would be for the FSS-based techniques, maybe. Yeah.
Yes, okay. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Hi. Here.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. Just one clarification on the reasoning for choosing CPU for that computation. So you said it's like 8 threads CPU, but couldn't you even further parallelize on putting that on GPU? Or what's the reasoning for using the CPU here?
Okay, so to answer your first question, the idea behind using the CPU was to show that LSS, when you compute securely with LSS, the resulting computation is extremely lightweight, right? You just need like a few tenths of ands and zors in order to compute a secure AND. So a CPU is well suited for this, which flies in the face of existing literature, which tells you no, you need a GPU for an efficient LSS implementation. Is the first thing. The second thing is that even if you were to put this computation after we've optimized it for the CPU on the GPU, you would get very little improvement in performance, at most 25%, because even on the CPU, we are communication bound, and the GPU cannot help you with that.
Thank you.
So it seems that you are mixing computation on the CPU with computation on the GPU, right?
Yes.
Is there any point that you think that because you'll be some part of your weights will be in CPU, and then they will need to be transferred to the VRAM and stuff. So there has to be some very fast communication between CPU and GPU to transfer the model weights around or whatever, right? So do you think that PCI bottleneck comes into play and has a significant factor?
The PCI bottleneck is very real, but it is not because you keep having to transfer the weights around. You do not. The PCI bottleneck actually exists because you have to transfer large FSS keys. FSS keys are humongous, and you have to transfer them from CPU memory to GPU memory.
Right.
Right, and that's where the PCI bottleneck comes in, not to transfer weights.
And is that a very significant thing that you need to care about, that I'm not transferring large amounts of memory back and forth from the CPU to GPU? Is that what you consider while you're tuning your matchmaker?
No, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. In some sense, we do, because when you split your computation between LSS and FSS, right, the amount of time it takes to transfer large FSS keys across the PCI bandwidth is a part of the online FSS time.
Okay.
Right, and of course, you include this when you think about how you want to split your computation. So yes, it does.
That's very cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, one more question. So I'm not too familiar with this Orca work. So how does the comparison protocol used there compare to the Cheetah and the more recent Panther protocols for a secure comparison, or solving like the so-called millionaire's problem?
I see. So Orca is not based on LSS, so it doesn't solve the millionaire's problem. It relies on function secret sharing. So FSS-based secure comparison, it uses distributed comparison functions. When we improve on top of Orca, we use distributed point functions.
Okay, but how in general can the two compare in performance for like secure comparison?
Yes, absolutely. So this is exactly what this graph shows, right? When the broader question you're asking is how LSS and FSS compare against each other, and that's exactly what this graph shows. So LSS-based protocols, so presumably if Cheetah is solving the million S problem and using LSS-based protocols, then it will be communication bound, whereas Orca is computation bound.
Hi, Neha.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question on that one. Like this work of Cheetah, I'm here in the back.
Oh, okay, hello.
Yeah. So the work of Cheetah, as far as I know, it's like they use a mix of FHE and MPC.
Okay.
Okay, for the linear layers, they use FHE, and for non-linear layers, they use MPC. And there is even a follow-up work called Panther that appeared this year, I guess. So they claim to have like very good complexity measures. Like for instance, ResNet 50 itself, it requires a total communication of 2.3 GB, if I'm not wrong. So my question is like how your scheme compares against such a scheme where they use the mix of FHE and MPC.
Okay, so my first question is this, are Cheetah and Panther in the pre-processing model, or are they like generic
No,
to
they
PC?
are not in the pre-processing model, they are like fully online.
So the two are incomparable, right? So if you wanted to, for example, compare the cost of Cheetah just for nonlinear layers because they're being done with MPC against LSSM, then yeah, I mean, it would really depend on having a performant implementation, which is one of the key points we make here.
So this scheme is mainly focused on improving the online phase, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So next question, could you maybe go back one slide where you show the final results?
Oh, I see, okay.
With the timings, yes.
Yeah.
I just missed, are those in seconds? So the 5:43 and 26, is that computation time in seconds?
Yes.
Okay, for the online phase, right?
Yes, that is
And could you maybe just repeat what was this mmconfig about? So that was if you use 100% one scheme and in the other part 44% one scheme and then the other. Okay, yeah, thanks for repeating.
Yeah, sure.
In the interest of time, we will take the questions in the offline.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay. So
Thank you.
So let's thank the speaker again. And the next talk will be by Shobhyadati Ghosh, the PhD student at Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. And the talk will be on stable and accurate real-time pricing in smart grids.
Hello. So myself Somavati. I am a PhD student under Professor Devdi Mukhopadhyay and Professor Somajit De, and this was a joint collaboration with us and Ajit Suresh and Urpita Patro and Harisma Boyapalli from NTU. So smart grid is a large-scale cyber-physical system. It's responsible for the generation and distribution of electricity. It also support a bidirectional communication network. So it consists of some consumers, suppliers, these utility providers, these data concentrator units, ISOs, each responsible for specific task in the smart grid domain. So among these, smart meters actually play a crucial role to send these fine gauge power consumption profiles of these consumers to these various entities to enable different kind of operations such as demand response, real-time pricing, load monitoring, etc. So the problem with this kind of setup is that these data concentrator units, utility providers, ISOs, these are usually considered semi-honest entities. And sending these fine-grained consumption profiles to these semi-honest entities may leak some serious real-life patterns of consumer daily life behavior. This has already been highlighted in existing literature. In 2013, a resident power consumption profile of a net profile resident is analyzed to obtain their daily life patterns, their sleeping duration, their home absence. And for example, on this April 28, you can see the power consumption actually bounded by a particular upper limit, which actually indicates that the consumers are indeed not at home. So these kind of privacy concerns are actually also currently highlighted by NIST, what are problems or privacy concerns of arises collects and use of smart grid data. So to secure against this kind of privacy concerns, secure communication-based protocols are actually considered. However, due to the internal semi-honest entities, adversaries, these kind of protocols actually leak private information. Another way is to offset the power consumption profiles using your battery and alternate energy sources, but they're actually high implementation and maintenance costs. Another possible way is obfuscation-based techniques, which actually use differential privacy and other kind of statistical obfuscation, which actually add noises to the smart meter data to actually hide the original values. However, as you can understand that it actually creates a privacy utility trade-off problem with higher privacy up to add more noise, which can reduce the utility of the computation. Another possible way is the homomorphic encryption, where we encrypt the data and do computation on top of the data, but it is computation expensive, and also currently it doesn't support some real-life applications. So mostly it is used for your time of use pricing and your data aggregation. So in this work, we look into multi-body computation for smart grid security, privacy, and as well as secure computation. So as you can see, as a use case, we choose real-time pricing. Real-time pricing we choose because it's a core grid functionality, and also it is established in various real-life places. For example, as you can see, it is established in California and also New York. And also it is better compared to the current TOU tariffs. So however, if we now add differential noise on this real-time pricing demand model, so what will happen? What will happen? So pricing mismatches, so original pricing and the output pricing due to this noise addition actually increase very much. So in differential privacy, smaller epsilon actually indicates greater privacy. As you can see here, with smaller epsilon, noise are induced is much higher, and as a result, your computation accuracy is very much low. So another possible use case is that you can use HE-based RTP, means FHE. So problem with this FHE is that the real-time pricing function is actually a contains a division operation. So because of that, it's a kind of bottleneck, and existing solutions use the Taylor series expansion, Chebyshev, and maybe polynomial approximation for the division operations. So we implemented this using various libraries, and we observed that under a million consumers, if we implement it using division protocols, the accuracy is around 10 to the 1 to 10 to the 3, which is significantly higher. So next we went to MPC. We use SecFloat, scale Mamba, and MP speeds under a million consumers with base possible suitable parameters. And we observed that the accuracy is comparably better than differential privacy-based noise addition techniques and your FHE-based techniques also. As you can see that SecFloat actually provides accuracy of 10 to the minus 2. And also you can see that the error is continuously increasing. The reason being this the real-time pricing, these are closed loop operations. So once the error got introduced, it will continuously go forward in an iterated loop. So it is important to the error actually reduced from the first iterations only. So it actually shows the promise of MPC in this kind of computation compared to DP and FHE. So to put into perspective, so this is the average power consumption of a household in American household, and so accuracy decrease of 10 to the minus 1 or minus 2 can lead to around 300 units of extra cost per day. So to look into the root cause of this kind of problems in MPC, we actually observed that the main problem is the floating point numbers are not uniformly distributed. Because of that, the secret sharing is mostly done using your fixed point arithmetic, or you secret share the individual sign, exponent, and significant values under different rings. So problem with this key, if you do like that during computation between multiple parties, you have to compare this exponent value. You need to do some additional operations on top of the data. Because of that, what happens is that precision got decrease of the computation. As of now, SecFloat provides the highest possible precision with 32, which is comparable to 32-bit floating point arithmetic. And also, as I mentioned, container division operation, inaccuracy in division computation will actually go into this closed loop system, and it is continuously increasing the computational error. So So we need to first create a kind of better secret sharing scheme suitable for this kind of applications. We also provide a division protocol, which actually provides a better accuracy of current possible solutions. So as I mentioned, the current additive secret sharing based floating point value actually, which uses this sign, exponent, and significant based secret sharing and different rings, they actually doesn't satisfy this kind of property where f is equal to f1 plus f2 plus f3, where f1 is that corresponding secret shares, f1, f2, and f3. So in this paper, we try to create a secret sharing scheme which actually suppose is IEEE 754 arithmetic, and such that we can maintain this additivity of this original floating point values, f1, f2, and f3. The problem with this actually is that, as I mentioned, floating point numbers are non-uniformly distributed. So if you try to pick a uniform floating point number from the floating point domain, you will get the values from these higher values. Because of that density of the floating point values, as you can see from here, the values are closely ranged from the 0 to 1 values, and slowly it goes towards higher values. It is very less and less values. This is because of the exponent thing of the IEEE 754 arithmetic. So if you pick a uniform number, it will be most likely from the higher values, most of the time. So suppose now if you pick a uniform number f1, uniform number f2, then you try to find a third share f3. So f3 is mostly contain the decimal values of the original value, which kindly leads to information leakages or also precision losses. So because of this, we actually use a simple input sharing protocol where we actually sample this R1, R2, and R3 this uniformly, and then another party samples, and we compute this R. Then this party send this R1, R2 to the corresponding computation parties, and this party who is actually trying to send the secret share the original input U, is actually compute this U minus R value in, you can see, is line 6, and then it sends to this party P1. So ultimately the party P1, P2, and P3 contains corresponding shares. And also I like to mention this the addition and the division, addition and the subtraction operations, as you can see here, are based on the IEEE 754 arithmetic. Okay, and to put a extra layer of security, we actually don't secret share U directly. We actually sample say random alpha, uniform random alpha, and we secret share alpha U instead of U. And also, as for the division, actually the alpha cancels out. And for other computation, during the computation, we perform an extra layer of computation, and we remove the alpha from the final results. And we show that this actually guarantees high computational accuracy also, and actually is secure under three-party semi-honest setting. So based on the secret sharing scheme, we need to develop our division protocol. So most of the division protocols doesn't actually based on this original means addition of additive property of the floating point values. So because of this, we developed this one. So this is kind of difficult. So you can focus on this one. So consider two values x and y. So instead of we first do the inverse operation, we do this 1 by y by xi. Then we divide this y by xy to local computations and multiplication based computations. So this yi by xi terms can be computed locally, and this yi by xj kind of terms we will use secure your multiplication based protocol. Then the corresponding spheres you can see from the blue parts actually computed by this first party, and the red part by the second party, and the green by third party. So this part what you are seeing actually is done by protocol 1. So once we get this kind of shares for individual parties, so this in the next step, the corresponding parties, the other parties actually redistributes the share to so that party P1 can actually add these blue parts, and the party P2 can actually add these red parts, and party P3 similarly green parts. So at the end of the day, you will get 3 additive shares of the original floating point value. Not like you are getting the additive shares of the sign, exponent, and significant. Instead, you will get the additive shares of this original floating point value that you can directly share with the parties, and they can reconstruct get the value. So for the implementation purposes, we use a library soft float. So it actually ensure precise hardware floating point procedures and also provide accuracy till 64 and 64-bit IEEE 754 representation, and till also 128-bit. So we did till 64-bit only, and it we actually adapted the software library by embedding sign and exponent significant values under different ring structures. We also updated the existing addition and multiplication protocols from these respective papers to under our secret sharing scheme, and also implemented the division protocol of our scheme using the software library and incorporated there. And with our, we observed that we have modification. We actually, for this each and every operations, addition, multiplication, and division, we actually get a accuracy comparable to 64-bit 14-point numbers in a 3-party MPC setting. Also, we use these various operations and implemented our 3-party based real-time pricing protocol. So here consumer suppliers and the consumers and suppliers send their respective secret share values to the computing entity, and they perform this consumer pricing function, as is highlighted here. So we also maintain a very high, very fast computation. It's actually constant communication and computation cost for consumer and suppliers, and it is linear for these respective computation entities, means ISOs. So as a result, when we implemented this in our RTP setup, we observed that we get 8 orders of higher accuracy compared to SEC float under 1 million consumers. And also, if you increase the consumer size, obviously the accuracy will decrease. It is not actually proportional, but it will kind of decrease. And we also observe that it is based to perform this MPC inversion multiplication instead of division, and also it is based to do this multiplication first instead of this division comparable multiplication, because it introduces extra inaccuracies. And we also seen that the supply and demand mismatch from our protocol is kind of closer to 0, which indicates that the overall smart grid system is going to a stabilization. But with existing protocols, it shows that the supply and demand mismatch is actually continuously increasing. It was highlighted that with time, the system is going to destabilization. We also looked into whether if you add extra consumers, whether it can handle the such scenarios, whether you change some extra uncertainties in the system, whether it can handle the values such as time shifting appliance behavior. We observed that the accuracy decreases for a slight time, but after some time, the accuracy again goes to the 10 to the minus 10 accuracy. We also do the RTP execution time per consumer under a total 1 million consumers. As you can see, the execution time per consumer is very less for our protocol. This is mainly because that we do most of the computations locally, where the existing protocols need to do lots of communication for the matching of exponent, then truncation, all those things, and which is actually not needed in our protocol. So to conclude, actually, existing solutions based on differential privacy, homomorphic encryption in smart grid domain are not suitable for this kind of computation that can provide privacy but not computational accuracy. So MPC will be a perfect solution for this kind of setups, which is not explored currently in the literature. So we explore the MPC in this domain for the first time. We also try to improve the accuracy of the overall computation. So with this, I will conclude my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions?
Excuse me.
There's a question there.
Hello.
Yeah.
On consumer side, what is the hardware configuration you are using for?
So, sorry, I didn't include it here. We actually created one in-house smart meter in our system using Raspberry Pi model 4. So we implemented we implemented all the secret sharing protocol, everything in that smart meter actually, and we saw the real-time feasibility of that time here actually. We use Raspberry Pi 4 for the consumer side model actually.
I have a couple of questions. If could you go back to the previous slide, the last slide?
This one?
Yeah, this one. So you were saying the execution time. So like what are the other parameters in the sense, like what is the size on which this execution time is measured? Like
size in terms of
essentially is it like what is the execution time for?
So execution time is, suppose you have this function, right? So you have this function. So in this function, you have to do some aggregation. So you can see the total supply is there, total pricing there. So you have to do some aggregation. So suppose you have 1 million consumers, you have to do aggregation on top of that. So then you have to do multiplication. So over execution of this computation. So suppose you have 1 million consumers, so you have to do computation for 1 million consumers for different data. So if we take a total computation and then kind of find the average of that, that is the average execution
Okay,
time.
the average per user.
Average per user,
okay,
yeah.
Okay, got it. And one more question is that you used floating point arithmetic over here.
Yes.
Which I think is less efficient than fixed point arithmetic, right?
So actually, we observed that the floating point arithmetic, suppose sec float if you consider, sec float is based on the floating point arithmetic only, right? But it provides us accuracy till your 30, comparable to 32-bit floating point arithmetic, right? Which is compared better than compare other fixed point as of now, no? So we because of that actually we use this floating point IEEE 754 format actually,
Okay.
inspired by sec float.
Okay. Okay, if there are no other questions, we thank the speaker again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. This concludes this session.
So we now have a sponsor session from Abhay, who is from Data for Public Good, and that will be the session currently.
No, that's fine. In the end, I'll try to see. And then hello. Yeah, I'm audible. Yes. Okay. So I think this is the last talk before the lunch. So I will try to wrap it up quickly. Don't want to come in between you and food. So actually, I work at CDPG, which is Center of Data for Public Good. We look at different, like various, our main product at CDPG is data exchanges, where we collect a lot of data from various public, private entities and try to see where we can use it for public good. And now, essentially, we started with some data sources which were non-personal in nature, and therefore they were not so sensitive. And we had set up some good exchanges, like our main flagship product is India Urban Data Exchange, where data from smart cities, 50 smart cities is aggregated on that exchange. And similarly, we have now agriculture data exchange with Government of Telangana, where we have data from agriculture domain, and we try to set up some good use cases on it. But what I'm going to talk about here today is that sooner or later, some sensitive data starts to pour in, some data which has personal information starts to pour in, and then I'm going to just describe some of the ways in which we equip our exchanges to handle this data, right? So let me just quickly start with this picture. Basically, some few years back, if a farmer comes to a bank, wants a loan, from the time he applies to finally the loan disbursement, it's actually weeks, if not months, right? Our goal is to reduce this whole loan process from weeks to minutes, okay? And it's possible with Exchange. That's a very good use case for an exchange. As you see, there's farmer land records, there is existing loans from banks, data from farmers. So all that data is available. All you have to do is run some rules engine on top, run some models on top, and then give the loan. So today, actually, we can do that. So for example, we recently, few months back, HDFC, which is a huge bank in India, they actually disbursed loans based on this ADEX. ADEX is one of our products, Agriculture Data Exchange. Now, the point that we are trying to make, right now, we either anonymize the data or worse still, we don't use the data which could have been used for giving, say, efficient loans. Right? So for example, we could have used information from farmer producer organization, which is like, which has got a lot more personal information about personal households, right? So this is a very strong case that we are trying to say that such kind of simple but very impactful use cases can be used with secure computation, right? So we want to obviously protect the data, but not only that, we want to we want to like use this as a kind of an enabler to give more and more personal data to give better loans, right? So another use case I want to again, this talk is more going to be little high level and use case. So social benefits delivery. If you know, almost every state government in India comes up with social benefits scheme, right? Now, these kind of schemes, you know, the burden, previously the burden of proving that I could be a beneficiary lies with the beneficiary itself, and that takes a lot of time. So here is like, if we could collect this data about the beneficiary from different departments, right? Health and family welfare, labor and wage data, and then again, run some nice rules engine on top of that, beneficiary identification can be speeded up. And this is something which is again of huge interest, and it has not been automated again because of this reason, right? There's a lot of personal data involved in it. So again, this is again a very strong use case, and we are pushing for it at whatever forum we can, that okay, we can use secure computation, confidential compute, or SMPC kind of technologies for keeping such data safe and actually improve the return times for all of this, right? So again, this is based on what we have seen on the field. We have open data and high valued data, which is what we generally deal with, right? Like traffic and transit data, micro weather data. And we understand basically the technologies here are mainly access controls, open APIs, data models. I think these are pretty mature. There's a lot of DPI. DPI is a word we use a lot in India, like for digital public. It stands for digital public infrastructure, right? There's a lot of DPI already existing here. However, personal and sensitive data like health data, there will be a lot of financial data, right? Administrative data coming in from apps, right? Very important data, right? That's even better than survey data these days, administrative data. How do you use that? So for that, technologies that we have at our hand, DP, SMPC, HE, TEE, there's a lot of action here, but we are yet to see, like we want to see some DPIs in it, and that is our goal. We are trying to work in creating some DPIs so that different departments, so that the ecosystem gets strengthened, they start using it. There is some open source representations, good and well-tested code out there, right? So pets again, very important. They are crucial in ensuring. So very important is it's crucial that we innovate with sensitive data. See, most of the times in India, the data is just not shared. And they say, I don't know how to handle this data. I don't want to give it. So these kind of technologies are really, really like useful in at least providing that trust that we can do this, we can innovate with this data, we can use this data. Of course, by keeping compliance and legal requirements in mind, right? So again, our view is very simple. I think this is well-established view again, that how do I use all these technologies, right? So the thing is that any use case we take, if you look at end-to-end data flow for that, it's going to reside in one of these 4 states. The data is going to reside in one of these 4 states. At rest and end transit, I think, well understood. We understand all the best practices on how to use. Whereas data in use, which is also called input privacy in many places, like data in use and data post-use is something that we are trying to solve. For that, a lot of these technologies fall into that, right? So especially data in use is very useful, where, for example, SMPC, which is of huge interest in this conference, right? So data in use, like in India, for example, there was this digital revolution is really creating because of another policy framework of government. Government always wants us to, they have this word called cloud first. They want us to move things into the cloud, right? And when we move things into the cloud, if the data is sensitive, then I think there are a lot of problems, right? So that is where data in use protection is very important. And data post-use, obviously, if I do some insights, I release the data out, there can be privacy breaches on that. So that is where we talk about differential privacy, k-anonymization, synthetic data generation, like DP, I haven't put that, like DP, SDG, or DP learning, DP synthetic data, all those things, right? So we need basically a platform to protect data in all 4 states. Now, which particular ones we will use, that depends upon the use case, of course, right? So here is the view. I think it's just another way of saying some of the what I was trying to say in the previous slide. I think we are trying to go towards a platform. It will be an open source platform, and it will provide the following guarantees. These 4 guarantees are useful. That raw data will never be exposed to consumers and the facilitating parties or any other data providers. Then the data protection will be provided at rest, in transit, and at use. And if you have to release data publicly, then output privacy safeguards will be available, which essentially means that we'll have some DP before we release the data. And one more important thing that I haven't talked here, data is always shared under proper authorizations. This is like at any level we'll have this, authorizations in place. And this itself, there is a lot of research in this. It's a very powerful thing because you don't want to, like in India we have personal consents, and I think so a lot of these, we need to also innovate on that space, because that also needs to be scalable. If you are talking about so many users, then every time you start taking consents, that also is not very useful, right? So there is an innovation in that side also that we are doing. So in general, like what we are doing currently, the secure compute layer, we are, for the time being, we are focusing on implementing it using TEE or SMPC. I think this is just a quick slide. Like like when I'm saying that our goal here is again, so like I'm a user of technology, right? Like this is not, you guys are the SMPC experts and you are making these cool algorithms. So what we think or what we want to do right now is we want to take whatever is there and try to make sure that we move from that point to quickly to the deployment. Okay, deployment, and also in an, as I said, because our goal is open source, right? So we always, these are the 2 things in our mind. So again, some innovations have to happen there to get more speed ups, to have like, so for example, we started with ABY2, Motion 2NX, and basically some of the things that we had to do was to improve storage requirements. I think these are well-known techniques also, and they may carry over to other things too, like interlayer and intralayer splitting, especially very useful for CNNs. And then similarly, we have to put in helper nodes to get speed up, like if we want to remove OT. And similarly, we are currently working on trying to put a 3rd node to actually speed up the nonlinear operations. I think then this is very important. This is the deployment part. See, most of the frameworks that are available right now, they are not like, we cannot take it and directly deploy it on the cloud, right? So that is where what I need by that is that these are not split according to what could be a good deployment architecture. Usually when we deploy, we need scalability and high availability, which means I need to split the different tasks into different microservices. To do that, I think that those are some of the efforts that are going on. We are working with Bosch Research Labs, who started a very nice initiative called Carbine Stack, and we are working along with them. And it's an open source stack again for scalable SMPC. It works currently with MP SpeedZ, but I think the long-term vision is that different frameworks can work with any framework essentially, right? So the idea is that it splits it into different services, foundational services, and then you basically containerize each one of them and then be able to deploy it like in a dynamic way through what we call through Kubernetes and others, right? So here, I think again, our specific contribution had been to actually provide support for the execution of this offline phase in a TEE, because we work in TEE, Intel SGX. So we have helped to speed up that. And actually that is, but essentially what we are trying to do now is take this kind of an architecture, deployment architecture, take it along with MP SpeedZ, and then essentially actually go ahead and deploy use cases, as I said, deploy use cases and actually put it onto the field, right? And then that's the best feedback that we can get. I just want to mention I think this is my last slide actually. So I just want to mention quickly some of the other use cases that have been told to us, and I think we are definitely looking at some of them. So definitely this collaborative learning using medical data is very useful. I think that is fairly clear. Benchmark computation is very important. I think again this is something that has been told to us, like many of these PHCs, primary health cares. They want to evaluate how each one of them is doing. Again, in a privacy-preserving fashion would be great. And I think the secure allegation escrow has been, I think we saw from Arpita's slide. But then I think we also have found some kind of like in complaints redressal from somewhere else also some query had come. So I think these are some interesting use cases. I think double auctions for farmers has also been very interesting. In Karnataka, in Karnataka there was some kind of an auction started for farmers. So I think this double auction for them, they had really expressed some interest in it, but let's see how it happens. Essentially in all of them, what happens is the policy is not clear many times, and so for the lack of the data, we're not able to go forward. But I think the goal is that we will have our infrastructure ready so that whenever we get the data and there is all those decks are cleared, we'll be there to implement these things. So I think I'm going to stop here. So I think that's. Thank you.
In case you have openings at this center,
absolutely,
you can probably talk about that.
Yes, I think for all of these, the slides that I have put it are very high level, but you can go outside in our stalls. I think there's a lot of the work that has to be done to actually get this up and running. So I think we have openings both in SMPC, TEE. We are also thinking of starting the SHE, FHE part, DP. So we work. So I think any PhD students who are about to graduate, please feel free to get in touch with me.
Any other questions?
Hello. So you spoke about the Intel SGX, right?
Yes.
So isn't that having like a single point of failure? Basically, it completely depends on the CPU, right? If the CPU is compromised, is there a have you how would it work around? I'm just trying to learn that.
No, so basically we are just in the TEE. You are only generating the correlated randomness. So that is one part. That is the part. The offline phase is what is being speeded up using the SGX. But then there are other microservices, right? Which is there's not a single point of failure. These microservices are running in different VMs. So I think
so the secure the computation part is not happen. It's only the generation of the
generation is happening in TEE. The computation is happening in separate VMs. Now, where the computation is happening, that also is not a single node. These are all clustered nodes. So everything it's failure tolerant.
Yeah. Hi, I'm just more interested in your contribution to Carbine Stack with this SGX-based preprocessing. So can you maybe talk a bit more about this figure? What are these different TE 0 and 1 things?
Yeah, so basically these are the two KIIs are the two machines where actually the computation is happening, and TEE 0 is associated with KII 0, and I think TE 1 is associated with this. So both of them in the offline phase will work with each other and keep the CRG, compute the CRG functions, and then actually send the data back to the individual machines. So both of them, they have to be basically at the beginning, they have to be attested. First of all, they want to ensure that they are doing what they are doing, and then they actually talk to each other, and then go ahead and generate this CRGS. Actually, yeah, maybe more we can discuss outside, actually, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for the speaker? So let's thank the speaker, Abhay, for a nice talk.
Thank you very much.
And we will now be having a lunch session lunch break from 1 to 2 p.m. And we will all assemble at 2 p.m. here for the next session. Thank you.